This is one of many pictures I'm going to share with you today of my journey in Scotland. But before we do that, let's talk about the subject. Let's just lay it out there to begin with. Overcoming obstacles, overcoming barriers in life, the difficulties that life throws at us. There's often a multitude, aren't there? Many things that we could list in that category of things that we try to juggle in life or just make all fit together. We could start with physical needs. We know that we have physical needs. We know that we need food and shelter, water and warmth. We need some of the basic necessities of life. We have emotional needs, love, family, community, and relationships. We know that these are important to our health and well-being. We have spiritual needs, whether we attend a church or not. We know that we need to have faith. We need to have grace and compassion, hope, and maybe even a basic set of morals by which to live our life. We understand we have financial needs too, don't we? We know that we have needs that would actually help provide for our physical needs, the food that we eat, the shelter that we live under, maybe even providing for our emotional or spiritual needs in ways. We know we have educational needs because if we don't have the education, we can't have the job, which means we don't have the finances to take care of the physical needs. Do you see how these things all build up? Everything builds upon each other, and everything is like this stack of keeping everything in a nice, neat order, and life has got to just all stay in place, right? Once in a while, one of those things will bump out of place. You'll have a stroke. You don't expect it. You'll lose a job, and you're not ready for it. And all of a sudden, life seems out of place. It feels like my life is falling, and I need to shuffle things back in order or juggle them to keep them in line. Or all of a sudden, it feels like a mountain in front of us that we can't overcome. And the truth is, we all have obstacles in life. We all have mountains that rise up in front of us, barriers. And I want you to begin today, in the message today, to begin to think about what is it that you're currently facing? What is the current situation in your life that just feels like an obstacle that you know you're not going to make it through, or you're not sure you're going to make it through, or it just feels like it'd be easier to give up and turn around? And the truth is, we all face those kind of situations where we just feel like, it's easier to give up. I want you to hold that particular circumstance in your life in mind today as we talk a little bit. I'm going to share with you some photos, like I said. This is part of my renewal leave, the 3-month journey that I had in Scotland this summer. And so I'm going to talk about some of the high places and the places that I hiked. This first one is a family photo. First couple, actually, are family photos. This is Nathan. He didn't know I was putting that in there. Nathan and the crow. Don't miss the crow. We're actually up on top of Arthur's Seat, which is just outside of Edinburgh. You can see Edinburgh in the background there. And we're just enjoying that hike. The next one is the same thing, but looking up at the topmost peak, you can see Jody and Hannah and Nathan up there. And again, around the corner, you see the ocean, but you also see a little bit of Edinburgh there. This wasn't that hard of a hike. It was a short hike, maybe 40 minutes up and back. But it was steep enough that there was not a whole lot of people jogging up. In fact, there weren't too many. There were, however, a few that we ran into that were going so far and sitting down and taking a break and saying, "Whew, that's more than I expected." And a couple of them I even heard say, "This is far enough for me. I don't need to go all the way to the top. You go to the top." And they were talking to their family or whoever was hiking with them. "You go to the top. I'm going to just stop right here." And I thought to myself, how often in life do we do that? How often do we encounter a situation and it just feels like it's really not that big of a deal or that big of a mountain to climb, but we get so far along the way and we say, "I'm tired. I'm done. I'm just going to take a break right here and then I'll go back down. You guys go see the top and I don't need to see that." But I will tell you from experience, every time I reach the top or I'm looking down on the clouds, I get a different perspective of the world and I think, yes, this is where I was meant to be. This was the destination that God had in mind. I'm glad that I didn't stop along the way. This next one is one, some of you remember the photo that I shared from the island of Iona and the abbey that's been there for 1,500 years. And I lived in this abbey for a week and worshiped. And every morning we worshiped, every noon and every night. We worshiped 3 times a day together. And it was absolutely beautiful experience. But one morning I got up before worship, early in the morning, all by myself, hiked up to the top of the mountain in the center of Iona. And again, it wasn't that long, but I had to get up early. How many of you love getting up early to exercise, especially when you know you're coming back to worship? And by the way, I did think that 3 times a day worshiping was going to get, but it wasn't definitely was not as I thought. It was actually more spirit-filling than I ever could have expected. But this was my experience one morning when I got up and decided that it was important to take the time in the morning and get up early enough that I could get to the top of the mountain. And if I hadn't gotten up early, if I hadn't made the extra effort, if I had just decided to go through the motions and do the same thing that everybody else was doing, I would have never had that picture. And how true it is in life, the same thing can occur. If we're just comfortable doing what everybody else is doing, if we're just set in the motions of the routine, we'll never see these kinds of things because most of the world isn't going to set goals that are going to put us above the normal everyday crowd. We have to be willing to excel and to push ourselves even harder. In fact, to accept the goals that God has for us and to live into them, even if it's a little bit of hard work. The next few photos, some of you might have seen these on my Facebook, but they're ones that it took me a hike, several days. In fact, it ended up being 3 or 4 days in this whole journey. You can go ahead and put it up there on the screen. I started in Glenfinnan. You know Glenfinnan because if you've seen Harry Potter or the bridge where the train travels across, that's where the Glenfinnan Bridge is. So I started hiking there, and I hiked in a day, and I camped down in the valley and enjoyed that. And then this hike is supposed to take you around all of the high peaks. It's a fairly easy 30-mile hike one way if you go around. And I decided I didn't want to go around. I wanted to hike up and over and push myself. Most people take the valley. Most people stay in the valley. And by the way, I figured out why they stayed in the valley. Because hiking up this mountain, there were several times on the second day of the journey as I'm hiking up, and I'd already had about 10 miles into the hike, and I was getting exhausted. And I hit this mountain, and I start climbing up, and there's not really a trail that goes up. I mean, there's a trail there, but it's like in the midst of this little water stream. And it's more like climbing a set of ladder and rung than it is actually hiking because it's that steep and you're actually stepping in the water and kind of putting your foot in deep enough that you're not going to slide back down or otherwise. And I'm thinking to myself, why am I doing this again? I look back down and I'm looking at the trail. In fact, I saw one guy walk on the trail. I'm like, that looks a lot easier. I could just go right back down there, get back on the trail, maybe even meet up with some of the people I saw and camped with last night. I said, no. I wanted to go to the top. I felt like I needed to go to the top and spend the night up here. And I look back now and I think, if I had not pushed myself, if I had not continued to press on instead of going back the easy route, taking the valley like everybody else was doing, I would have never had a picture like this or like the next one. The selfie's a really good one, I think. Yeah. See? You'd never have that kind of selfie. And that's one for the record books. Or the next one looking out over the next valley that I was going to head down into and catch back up. I would have never had this kind of morning view. And I thought to myself, how often it is that we never even know what we miss because we decide that we're not going to go to the top. We never even know the view or what it feels like to wake up in the morning above the clouds because we stayed in the valley from the start. I think we need to begin to ask ourselves the questions. God, when are you calling me to ascend above the clouds? When are you calling me to actually put forth the effort that will put me in a place to see something more beautiful than I've seen in a long time. God, when are you calling me to make the extra effort? The next ones I'm going to show, this is another day hike in. This is the Falls of Glomac, and I think it's the second largest falls in all of the UK. And you can't hardly begin to see it. It's 300 and some feet drop, because this is what you can see from standing kind of right along the edge, because this thing drops right down into a crevice. And the next photo will actually give you more of a picture of where I camped, and looking down, you see right there on that right side, it just drops straight down in the middle of that gorge. But I hiked up here and stayed up here for 3 days. By the way, it was not the most enjoyable experience. It was one of those that I was constantly wet, and all of the ground, no matter where you walked, you were sinking in about that far or that far because it was that wet. And the midges, by the way, were annoying. These little, not mosquitoes, but these no-see-em bugs they're so small you can't see them, except the fact that I was wearing yellow, and when I would step out of the tent, my yellow became black. There were so many of them. They swarmed you in such a way that you were just completely covered. I had a head net. That's the only way I could get around. But I look at this and I think, I spent 3 days out in an absolutely beautiful space, experiencing God, watching the water, the wildlife, and it was absolutely beautiful. And unless I was willing to endure some of the difficulties of that experience, I would have never had it. Unless I was willing to actually put on the head netting, if I was not willing to actually take the hike and be wet on a constant basis, I would not have experienced something so beautiful and so grand. And I wish I could express it more. And some of you are still going, well, I still would never do that. And that's true. There are some experiences in life that we say, I'm not cut out for that. But the truth is, we also often never know what we're missing because we're not willing to go through the trial that's a part of it. I've got a couple pictures from the island of Lewis also, which is, this is actually, they call this the butt of Lewis. It's the furthest north point. I don't know why they call it that, but it's the very butt north of Lewis, and it's the lighthouse. It's absolutely beautiful up there. It's actually, this is one of those places I didn't intend to go to, but it so happened that I had it available. I had a little extra time. I made this stop happen. And I thought, how beautiful and how amazing that I was able to spend some time in this space. I'll go on to the next one. I actually see one of the trails was a nice trail, I think. We're going to start at the Kirang. This is actually one of those photos of the Sky Trail that, well, again, was a multiple day hike. And I started out on this one, and it starts in a place that you're able to get right along the road. They've got coffee and cappuccino and morning breakfast sandwiches, and it is nice. And not only that, but they have buses that come up there, and you can hop on a bus and head back to town, and bed and breakfasts, or, a hostel if that's what's available, but a bed. And I spent one night up in the Kirang, which is going to be the next photo, but I don't have to go there quite yet. And I came down to there, and then I started hiking again for another several days, and I looked back down. I got about to the top, and I'd been hiking about an hour just to get to the first ridge. And I look back down, and I'm wet, and I'm exhausted, and I know I've got a couple days to go hiking in this direction, and I look back down and think, cappuccino, I could go back. I could get a bus. I could get a bed. Why not? That's where I should go, right? I should just go back to the comforts of life. Okay. Do we do this? I think we all do this. I think we all encounter situations where we know that the difficult path is in front of us, and we look back and we think, that going back looks a lot better. That happens a lot in churches. They remember the good old days, and they think, oh, this is the way it was and the way it has been. We should go back to that. That's just the perfect place to be. but I would have never seen this kind of view. By the way, I hiked pretty much all of that ridge and up and down, and it was up and down. It was up 600 or 800 feet. It was down 600 or 800 feet. It was wet. It was slippery. It was all kinds of mess, and yet it was the most beautiful and amazing experience I've had. The next picture actually will show you the first night that I hiked. Oh, no, maybe I don't have that photo, do I? Nope. Go back to the other one. This is looking back in the very center north up there is the Kurang. And I had one photo that was supposed to be in here also that has a picture of my tent right in the middle of all of these spires that are popping up and around. And you hike up in, and it's hard to hike up in there because you've got this very loose rock, this scree that you've got to scramble up, and then you get up into the center, and it's beautiful, but it's hard to get there. And it's a very flat, they call it the table, and you can camp up there. And I camped up there and looked. It was just beautiful in the clouds and the fog. It felt like Lord of the Rings kind of imagery, just absolutely beautiful. I hiked from there down and around. This is about 1 day hike from up there down to where I'm at here. And then I've got another day or two still headed down south. I would have missed all this if I decided just to accept the comforts of life, to go back instead of to go forward. I think, is it the last photo that's coming up? This last photo is on the island of Egg. And this is a small community. Less than 300 people live on the whole of the island. And it's a very small island. And there's several islands, so you can see one in the distance there also. This particular one, I wouldn't have had to hike up there. It wasn't really that big of a deal. It was, only 3 hours there and back. Well, probably 2 hours there, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours back. But the challenge of it was, again, it was very wet. The trail, there was not a trail that stayed dry. Everything was, you'd have to walk through that much water at different places. The real challenge here was the wind. The wind was so challenging on this particular hike. Literally, I can say there were times if I didn't get my foot planted hard enough before I took my weight off the next one, I would be blown backwards. And there was times that my ears are very sensitive, and I was covering my ears, just trying not to get so much wind blown in my ears. And there was times in fact, I remember one time, I was really talking to God. I looked up and said, really? Anybody ever do that to God? I did that at this point. I was like, really, God? Come on, just shut down the wind. I mean, you stopped the wind. Jesus stopped the wind on Sea Galilee. Just let that happen. He didn't stop the wind for me. But I kept going. And I think sometimes we need to realize that we face circumstances that just want to push us backwards. We face challenges in life that feel like we're being blown around, tossed around, like we try and take a step forward and we get pushed 2 steps back, and we realize that, boy, it would be easier just to stop right where we're at, sit down and wait. Or it'd be so much easier just to turn around and let the wind blow us back home. But then I take photos like this at the top, and I sit there and I enjoy the view, and I take a little bit of time and thank God that He's put me on this kind of journey and given me this kind of opportunity. And I realize I would have never seen this. I would have never even realized what I missed if I hadn't pressed through the challenge. The point of all of this is every single one of these pictures that I've shown you, I remember beforehand thinking to myself, I don't really have to do this. I can go and just enjoy a nice, relaxed day. I can stay at home. I can turn back. And I think there's a lot of situations in life, a lot of opportunities in life that we miss, that we never even see what they look like because we decide to give up, or that it's easier to turn around and go home. I think of Paul when he says that we're called to press on toward the goal to win the prize. We may not know what the prize is. Faith is believing in that which we haven't seen. Yes, I never saw any of those. I didn't know what they were going to be, and yet I believed that they were worth the effort. And I think we're called to believe that God is pointing us in a direction of faith that is going to bless us and empower us and give us opportunities. And we just have to take the steps of faith, no matter how difficult they are, day after day after day. And that God's going to bless us for running the course in faith. How often is it that we find ourselves in life up against obstacles and we just want to quit? Or we turn around, or we give in, or we hide our head in the sand until they pass us over. They could be financial, they could be family or education or relational, job-oriented. They could be based around our doubts and fears of our own self. Whatever they are, they make us want to give up. What are we missing? What are we missing when we give up? I mentioned Dawn this week who had a stroke, and I visited her Thursday. She's got a long ways to go. But she looked at me and she said, I got this. Well, I got this. I can do this. She says, I'm gonna be back in work next week. She says, I'll see you in church soon. She can't lift her right arm yet. She's still slurring. But she's got an attitude of perseverance, an attitude of I can do this, an attitude of I don't know how difficult this is going to be, but I'm going to get through it. I think that's the kind of attitude we all have to have, and to believe that God is with us in the midst of it. The truth is, we can't choose our obstacles. We can't choose that we want to go to the top of this mountain and push ourselves to do it. Our obstacles also often find us, and we have to decide whether or not we will push through them. Let me talk about some of the challenges just that I encounter here. I have people who will ask me what I do, and of course I tell them I'm a pastor, and they ask about this scenario, and I tell them, well, I'm a pastor who's starting a church in Johnston. We meet in a school, and we set up every week, and we do this and that, and they hear a little bit about it, and I said, oh, and I also pastor a church up by Madrid, Hopkins Grove, a little country church, and they're two very different scenarios. They hear a little bit about this, and I'm like, wow, that sounds challenging. And I look at them and say, you know, there are days it feels like I'm facing a mountain. That the obstacles are so abundant that you just kind of want to say, okay, that's enough. But then I tell them, you know what? The good news is I have seen the mountaintop enough. I have seen the destination. I've seen God's glory in our midst enough to celebrate even the mountains that I see and say, I know God has got something good. God's got something amazing in front of me. We had some committee and team meetings this past week, and I heard testimonies, and I see what God's doing in people's lives and the people that God has raised to leadership, even out of our midst, and sending people off already from here to be pastors and deacons and youth leaders. And I see that, and I think God is doing something amazing. And when I see people gathering together in the kind of community support and love and care that they have for each other, and I say, this is unique. This is different than any church I've been a part of, and I love the fact that we are able to bond together and love each other and care for each other so intimately. And I think, yes, this road is different. This path is more difficult, maybe more rocky than a typical or traditional kind of pastoral setting or church setting, and yet it is also much, much more rewarding. And I hope that every one of you feel the same way and that you can express the same kind of thing. This coming month in February, we've got that ministry celebration banquet coming up that I've told you everybody's invited to. But we're going to announce and talk about those who have been nominated to be on our committees going into chartering this September. We're going to celebrate the ministries that they have and the way everyone's volunteering and this mission trip to Oklahoma that's coming up. And we've got one to Honduras scheduled coming up for next year. If you want information, talk to Denise or to myself, and we'll get you going on those things. We're talking about the ways that the H2Go, the children's program, is blessing the kids and the families, the mother's ministry that's beginning to take shape. And I think God is doing so many amazing things that the journey is an abundant blessing. When I look at this passage and all of Scripture as a whole, I look at the challenges that Jesus says we will face. And I realize that life is not intended to be easy. Christian life is not intended to be the smooth path. Jesus says it will be the narrow road. It will be the hard road. You will find more obstacles even as a Christian. That's just the truth of the way it goes. But the good news is this passage tells us if we're born of Jesus, if we actually love the Father, means we're born of God. And that's why I had to ask myself the question, what does it mean to be born of God? What does it mean to overcome the world? And it says faith. Faith is the one answer in this. If we have faith in God, then it says we love God. And it says we overcome the world because of our faith. See, the whole purpose, the only way we can actually overcome these kind of obstacles, these kind of challenges in our life is that we have faith in someone who is greater than ourselves. Faith in the one who created all things. Faith in the one who moves mountains, who restores life, who heals the sick. When we have faith in God, we know that there's no mountain that can stop us because God has a plan to bless us and to continue to give us mountaintop views, even if we have to go through the valley to get there. So today my challenge is this to you. Whatever mountain you're facing, whatever difficulty, whatever feels out of place in life that you need to shuffle to get back in line, don't give up. Don't turn back. Don't say that you can't do this. Instead, cry out to God and trust that God is with you no matter what it is that you're facing. That's the promise and the good news that we have in the gospel. May God bless you on the journey.